You think you could survive a single day at the court of Louis XIV? Think again. This was a world of gold, silk, power, and the most horrifying smell imaginable. The Palace of Versailles dazzled visitors with its mirrors and fountains, but beneath its glorious surface hid a stench so overwhelming that even the Sun King's brightest rooms could not mask it. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was survival. In this story, you will step inside that world. You will walk the glittering halls where nobles schemed behind fans, but also where hallways doubled as toilets. You will learn how courtiers lived, lied, washed, or didn't wash, and how a single breath could reveal your rank, your secrets, or your doom. Welcome to a place where fragrance ruled like a weapon, and where you would not last a Hello. Welcome to my channel. Before we start, it's a good idea to get into bed and relax. I would also like to ask you to subscribe to my channel, like it, and write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Thank you. Sweet dreams. Arrive at Versailles before dawn, when the sky is still bruised with the last traces of night, yet the palace already stirs like a living beast beneath its golden skin. From afar it looks majestic, even divine, but the closer you get, the faster that illusion collapses under the weight of a smell so sharp it seems to slice the air. It creeps toward you like a fog, sour and heavy, mixing horse dung, spoiled food, stagnant water, sweat embedded in weeks-old clothing, and something darker, an unmistakably human musk that no morning breeze can scatter. You instinctively raise your sleeve to your nose, but it is too late, the odor has already forced itself into your awareness, sinking into your mind like a warning that will not be ignored. You tell yourself it must be the stables, or perhaps the muddy paths near the gates, but deep down you sense this is not an isolated pocket of filth. This is Versailles, grand, glittering, monumental, and rotting beneath its own magnificence. As the guards allow you through, their polished muskets gleaming in the dim light, you catch another wave of the thick, sour scent radiating from their wool coats and unwashed bodies. Bathing is considered dangerous by the court's doctors, who insist that water opens the pores to illness, so most courtiers have not bathed in months. Instead, they drown themselves in perfume, layer after suffocating layer, until their very presence becomes an assault of jasmine, civet, ambergris, and rose. You do not yet know that within hours this same mixture, rot buried under fragrance, will cling to you as stubbornly as a second skin. When the palace doors close behind you, the change is immediate, the air becomes warmer, heavier, staler. The smell changes shape but not intensity. Here, perfume dominates, a thick haze that floats above the halls like invisible smoke, but beneath it lies something far more persistent. The stench leaks from corners where chamber pots sit too long, from staircases where nobles relieve themselves as casually as breathing, from tapestries hiding stains no servant has time to clean. Versailles was built to be admired, not sanitized. There are rules, of course, proper places for certain bodily functions, but no one follows them. Walking to the gardens is too inconvenient, and pride demands that nobles behave as though their bodies are above such needs. And so they choose corridors, alcoves, fireplaces, believing the flames will purify whatever they leave behind. You try to remain composed, but the reality presses in on you with every step. You merge with a flow of courtiers heading toward the king's lever, the daily ritual of awakening Louis XIV, where every gesture, every glance, every inch of proximity can determine a person's fate. Faces around you glow unnaturally, painted with white lead that cracks at the edges, powdered wigs towering like monuments of vanity, lips tinted and cheeks rouged until each courtier resembles a carefully crafted doll. Their smiles are polite but lifeless, their eyes sharp and assessing as they measure your worth in a single sweep. At one intersection where the crowd slows, the smell intensifies abruptly, thick enough to make you dizzy. Only when a breeze shifts a nearby curtain do you understand, someone has used the alcove behind it as a toilet, recently and unapologetically. No one reacts. No one even glances in its direction. A young noblewoman walking beside you speaks without turning her head, her voice steady and cold. If you hesitate, they will know you are new. You force your spine straight. Good. Keep moving. If you faint, they will step over you. If you vomit, they will laugh. She drifts into another group, disappearing like a ghost just chamber where courtiers have gathered shoulder to shoulder, thousands of layers of fabric rustling like restless waves. The smell reaches its fullest strength here, bodies sweating under brocaded coats, wigs dusted with flour, faces coated in powders that mix with humidity and create a faint haze floating above the room like a low, pale cloud. You attempt to breathe through your mouth, but the taste of stale perfume and human closeness clings to your tongue. At last the doors to the king's private room open, and a ripple of reverence silences the chamber. Louis XIV steps forth, radiant in embroidered silk, his presence blinding compared to the dim rot around him. His own scent is a fortress, layers of orange blossom, jasmine, lavender, amber, applied by servants whose entire lives revolve around ensuring the king never smells like the world he rules. His doctors claim that strong perfume guards against disease, and the king accepts this as truth. Whether the courtiers believe it or not is irrelevant, they must pretend they do. You watch as the lever unfolds like a sacred dance. Selected courtiers, proud and trembling, approach the king one by one, each granted the honor of performing a single action, offering a sleeve, presenting a sword, adjusting a lace collar. Each gesture is a battlefield in disguise. A misplaced touch can ruin a reputation. A successful moment can elevate a family's name for generations. Behind every bow lies hunger, hunger for status, for privilege, for a place in the king's blinding orbit. As the ceremony ends and the crowds move again, the pressure eases but the smell returns with renewed sharpness. You expect the corridors to offer relief, but instead the familiar gust of rot and perfume rushes toward you like a greeting you cannot escape. Already you notice that the courtiers do not flinch. They glide through the corridors with serene expressions, as if the stench is nothing more than air. You realize, with a shiver, that they no longer smell it at all. They have lived in this miasma too long. By midday, dizziness creeps in at the edges of your vision. Your stomach churns each time a door opens and releases another wave of harsh scent. The palace seems to press itself against you, testing you, studying whether you belong. You try to focus on the grandeur, the endless mirrors, the golden moldings, the massive windows spilling light across polished floors, but every beauty hides another source of rot. Behind tapestries lie chamber pots. Behind curtains lie stains. Behind fans and powdered smiles lurk rivalries sharp enough to cut the unwary. And this, you realize with growing dread, is only your first morning. You have not even touched the true horrors of courtly life. The reality of court life begins to press on you like a weight that cannot be lifted. The glittering corridors of Versailles, filled with mirrors reflecting an infinite, almost blinding light, hide more than just beauty. Every step is an unspoken test. Every gesture carries meaning, every glance can be interpreted, twisted, or reported. You notice a cluster of courtiers near a hallway alcove, whispering urgently behind fans, their faces tense but painted flawless white. They are discussing a scandal that will consume a family within hours, an accusation of improper conduct, a stolen favor, or a failed gesture toward the king. Their voices are soft, almost drowned out by the rustle of silk, but their words carry the weight of potential ruin. And yet, despite their secrecy, something else surrounds them. The same pervasive stench that will never let you forget the palace is a living organism. You learn quickly that the most dangerous weapon at Versailles is not a sword, a poisoned drink, or a whispered rumor. It is smell itself. The smell of someone's body, unwashed for weeks, the smell of disease lurking beneath perfumed layers, the smell of desperation, of hunger, of anxiety. It announces who is weak, who is strong, who belongs and who does not. Courtiers are acutely aware of it. They spend fortunes on powders, perfumes, and scented gloves, each hoping to mask their true self long enough to survive another day. Walking past a cluster of nobles, you notice how they subtly inch away from one another, raising fans in calculated gestures that obscure their mouths and noses. They are performing a ritual of survival disguised as etiquette. And as you continue through the corridors, you witness countless other small horrors, servants rushing with chamber pots, spilling contents onto the polished floors, only to be carefully swept into hidden alcoves, piles of dirty laundry stacked in corners where no one dares to venture, and staircases that serve as both passage and toilet, used with astonishing regularity because the human body cannot always adhere to the king's timetable. You try to focus on the grandeur, the intricate tapestries, the ornate moldings, the gardens glimpsed through tall windows. But the scent, the crowd, the ever-present tension gnaw at your awareness, a constant reminder that in Versailles, survival is a form of art as delicate and dangerous as the dance of power itself. Every breath you take is a negotiation with your environment. You find yourself calculating how to move, where to step, how to breathe without betraying your presence or your ignorance. One wrong move, one feint or one involuntary grimace, could mark you as a newcomer, as someone weak enough to be ridiculed, or worse, dismissed into obscurity. A whisper reaches your ears, a noble warns another about the proper angle to hold a fan to avoid revealing the stench of one's armpits. You cannot help but marvel at this culture of subtle warfare. The sheer human ingenuity applied to concealing natural functions, the relentless focus on appearances, and the brutal efficiency with which power is enforced, all of it hits you like a tidal wave. And still, you continue walking, forced by curiosity and the pull of survival, deeper into a world where the glitter hides decay, where beauty is a mask for filth, and where the Sun King himself moves through the haze, untouchable, radiant, and almost unreal. Learn the true rhythm of life in Versailles, a constant interplay of sight, scent, and social calculation. Courtiers maneuver through the halls like dancers in a deadly ballet, each motion premeditated, each breath weighed for effect. The king's influence stretches into every corner, not through force alone, but through expectation, ritual, and the invisible chains of etiquette. The smells you endure now are not merely unpleasant, they are weapons, tools of hierarchy and control. You notice a man in front of you subtly retreating from another courtier, though both are equally perfumed. His retreat is not polite, it is a survival instinct. He senses the other man's power, and his body reacts before his mind even registers the danger. Perfume cannot cover all truths. No matter how sophisticated the scent, the body always betrays its owner, revealing exhaustion, fear, illness, or ignorance. You pass by a corner where a young lady recoils at a sound, a chamber pot has tipped, spilling its contents in a soft, sickly splash across the floor. No one stops. The scene is absorbed into the rhythm of the palace, ignored or acknowledged only in the most delicate whisper, if at all. Your stomach tightens at the sight, but you have no choice but to continue. Each hallway teaches you something new about endurance, about camouflage, about the invisible architecture of power. The king's subjects do not merely survive, they adapt, they thrive within constraints that would break any ordinary person. Their noses, minds, and egos are trained to function in the presence of filth and perfumed pretense alike. You realize that the ultimate lesson of Versailles is that the human body is both weapon and weakness, and mastery over perception is the only defense against the palace's relentless scrutiny. The smells you encounter are not random, they are encoded with information. The lingering scent of unwashed silk indicates a noble too proud to follow rules. The faint stench of sweat and musk signals anxiety, exertion, or fear. Courtiers learn to read these invisible signs with the precision of spies, their eyes and noses trained to detect weakness, to exploit opportunity. As you reach the grand dining hall for the midday repast, the heat and scent converge into a single oppressive wave. Servers weave through the crowd with platters of meat, cheese, and bread, all coated in oils and sauces that have begun to sour under the summer sun. The air vibrates with conversation, laughter, and the occasional sharp whisper. Every sound is amplified by the vastness of the space, yet swallowed by the sea of bodies. You notice a young page nearly stumble under the weight of a silver tray, and immediately a group of courtiers step aside, smirking. No one helps him. Assistance is a weakness. Survival is self-reliance. You grip the edge of a chair to steady yourself, all the while trying to memorize the patterns, the gestures, the subtle avoidance of contamination. Versailles is no longer simply a palace, it is an ecosystem, complete with predators, prey, and parasites, where only the adaptable, the observant, and the bold survive. By the time you take your first bite of food, you are exhausted, not from hunger or effort, but from the relentless mental and sensory calculation demanded of anyone daring enough to spend a day in the Sun King's orbit. And in that moment, you understand fully, one day here is a test of endurance, a trial by fire, or, in this case, a trial by smell. A new level of intensity. The courtiers have settled into their routines, but the palace itself seems to shift, almost sentient in its ability to expose weakness. Every movement, every whispered word, every measured glance is scrutinized. You notice a cluster of older nobles near a side gallery, their faces painted like porcelain masks, speaking quietly yet with a dangerous precision. They discuss alliances, debts, and favors, weaving a web that spans years of scheming. You feel small and untrained, acutely aware that your own posture, the way you breathe, even the subtle scent of your hair could betray your inexperience. Perfume is no longer enough, you must learn to move like the current of the palace itself, to anticipate the unspoken rules. Here, even proximity to the king's favored courtiers is a battlefield. A single misstep, an eye contact held too long, a smile given inappropriately, can mark you for ridicule, for exclusion, or worse. You follow the crowd into a long corridor lined with mirrors, and the reflection is dizzying, hundreds of faces, all striving to appear serene while their bodies betray stress, hunger, and fear. You realize that the scent is no accident, it is a medium of communication, a coded language of survival. The faint trace of stale sweat signals a noble who has exerted himself too much, the overpowering floral perfume signals arrogance, and the subtle notes of decay hidden beneath layers of musk hint at sickness or weakness. You watch as two men pass each other, nod politely, yet each recoils slightly as if touched by invisible talons. The slightest hint of an offensive odor can change the course of influence. You step lightly, mindful of where your feet land, careful to avoid spills, stains, or remnants of chamber pots left behind by the careless or unfortunate. Every breath is deliberate, every move calculated. You pass a young woman adjusting her fan, her powdered cheeks tremble slightly with suppressed nerves. She is aware of your gaze, but her eyes are trained to hide emotion, to maintain the illusion of composed elegance. She is, like everyone here, a master of survival in an environment where appearance dictates reality. You begin to understand that Versailles is not merely a palace, it is a battlefield of perception, scent, and etiquette, where the invisible rules are as lethal as any sword. As you move further into the heart of the palace, the corridors narrow, the air thickens, and the smells intensify. The thick perfume that once seemed protective now feels like armor too heavy to bear. You realize that endurance here is as much about the body as the mind. Your senses, assaulted by a mix of musk, sweat, and floral disguises, strain to decode the invisible hierarchies. Courtiers whisper in shadows, yet the slightest change in posture or a subtle twitch in expression can betray secrets. You observe carefully, noting who moves with confidence, who hesitates, who masks fear successfully. Even servants play the game, their roles are hidden but crucial. They navigate the chaos of scent and status with expertise, delivering messages, clearing messes, and adjusting perfumes on nobles before the king sees them. Their knowledge is silent but absolute, and one misstep can lead to punishment. You feel the weight of the day pressing on you. The grandeur of Versailles is undeniable, yet beneath it lies a labyrinth of social hazards, each more subtle than the last, each requiring attention, cunning. Fatigue sets in, but Versailles allows no respite. You find yourself moving into the Hall of Mirrors, where sunlight pours through enormous windows, bouncing off golden moldings and countless reflections. The hall is stunning, a marvel of architecture and light, but its beauty cannot distract from the oppressive reality of human presence. Hundreds of courtiers crowd the space, their layered costumes rustling like waves, their scented bodies creating an almost tangible fog. The smell here is layered and complex, perfume attempting to disguise the underlying rot, sweat, and human effluence, mixing into a singular, potent assault on your senses. You notice the subtle choreography of courtiers avoiding one another, fans raised strategically to hide their expressions and to shield themselves from odors. Every movement is both social maneuver and defensive tactic. Near the far end of the hall, a group of young men perform the intricate dance of flattery and observation, speaking softly while their eyes dart for weakness or opportunity. The slightest hesitation, a misaligned gesture, or a glance in the wrong direction can spell social death. You watch as one courtier's wig shifts slightly from the heat, revealing a patch of unwashed hair. The reaction is instantaneous, others subtly recoil, adjusting fans, shifting steps to avoid proximity. You begin to understand fully that in this palace, smell is not merely unpleasant, it is a weapon, a signal, a form of currency. Mastery of this invisible language separates the powerful from the powerless, the confident from the terrified. You press forward, observing each interaction, aware that you are still learning, still vulnerable. The servants move with quiet efficiency, replenishing powders and perfumes, clearing away spills that might otherwise betray the intimate truths of the body. You notice a young page stumble and nearly drop a tray, a whisper of laughter cuts through the tense air. No one helps. Assistance is a weakness, exposure is fatal. You realize that survival requires constant vigilance, not just of the body, but of perception, posture, and even scent. By evening, the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the gardens glimpsed through the tall windows. Courtiers begin to withdraw for private gatherings or dinners, yet the palace remains a hive of activity, alive with plotting, maneuvering, and observation. Each step you take reinforces the lesson of Versailles: beauty is a mask for decay, elegance conceals desperation, and survival is a delicate, ongoing performance. As the shadows lengthen, you feel a creeping awareness that even if you endure a single day, the palace has already claimed a part of you. Your senses are fatigued, your mind alert, your body uneasy, and your understanding of human endurance stretched to the limits. Yet there is no escape, not until the sun has fully set, not until you have proven, even in a small way, that you can navigate this labyrinth of scent, etiquette, and subtle threat. You begin to see that Versailles is more than a palace, it is a trial by human instinct, a test of endurance, cunning, and composure in a world where the smallest detail can determine life or oblivion. By nightfall, you are exhausted but alive, aware that tomorrow will demand even more, that the most terrifying weapons are invisible, and that to survive here, one must master the body, the mind, and the subtle language of smell that reigns supreme over all. The palace does not slow, it transforms. Candles flicker along gilded walls, casting dancing shadows across the hallways, yet the light does little to soften the reality beneath the grandeur. Courtiers glide through the corridors with heightened purpose, their powdered wigs towering above their heads, costumes stiff with starch, and layers of perfume clinging to their skin as armor against the stench of human life. The king's influence radiates through every corner of the palace, invisible yet undeniable, and each gesture, each step, each whispered word is weighed against the infinite hierarchy that governs the court. You notice groups forming in quiet alcoves, plotting alliances, observing rivals, exchanging favors in hushed tones. Their movements are so subtle that a newcomer might miss the intricacies entirely, yet every shift, every glance, every tilt of a fan conveys volumes to the trained eye. You are acutely aware that you are still untrained, vulnerable, a novice in this theater of power, and yet the scent, the pressure, the heat, and the noise demand that you participate. Even the servants play their own role in the evening rituals, moving silently through the crowd, adjusting wigs, reapplying powder, replenishing perfumes, and carrying away evidence of human weakness, spilled wine, overturned chamber pots, and remnants of meals long past their freshness. You realize quickly that Versailles is not merely a palace but a living organism, each part interconnected, each behavior influencing the whole. You pass a hallway where two courtiers stand near a window, whispering while the faint breeze carries the mingled scent of musk, sweat, and floral perfume through the corridor. One misstep, one falter in composure, and reputations could be ruined, alliances could be disrupted, opportunities seized or lost in the blink of an eye. Your senses ache as you navigate the space, constantly analyzing not only your own presence but also the invisible cues emitted by others. Even the faintest odor, the smallest twitch of a hand, or the slightest hesitation in speech could betray you. You understand for the first time that survival in this palace requires mastery of perception itself, a discipline far more demanding than any physical skill. The Sun King's influence is felt not only in the grand ceremonies or the lavish displays of wealth but in every breath, every step, every scent, every word spoken or left unspoken. You move toward the grand salon for the evening gathering, the center of political maneuvering and social display. Here, the stakes are even higher. Courtiers no longer merely seek favor, they observe, evaluate, and exploit the weaknesses of those around them. The hall is alive with the rustle of silk, the delicate clink of jewelry, the soft shuffle of shoes against polished floors, and above it all, the inescapable, pervasive aroma that defines the court, the weaponized scent of human life. You see a nobleman adjusting his wig, subtly sniffing the air, detecting which courtiers have not maintained their layers of perfume and which are vulnerable. A young woman glances at you for a fraction of a second, eyes assessing, calculating, before turning her attention elsewhere. You realize that everyone, including yourself, is a player, a potential pawn, and the slightest misjudgment could have consequences far beyond embarrassment. And yet, amid the chaos, a strange rhythm emerges. You begin to anticipate the movements of others, the shifts in the air, the invisible currents of power that ripple through the space. Each inhalation is a lesson in endurance, each glance a study in subtlety, and each step a measure of your own ability to survive. By the time you reach a vantage point near the center of the hall, exhaustion presses down on you. Your senses are overwhelmed, the combination of heat, scent, and constant vigilance leaves your body trembling, your mind racing. And yet, despite it all, you realize you are beginning to understand the rules of the palace, the hidden mechanisms that govern who thrives and who falls, who is observed and who is ignored, who is noticed and who is dismissed. Versailles is both beautiful and terrifying, a place where appearances are everything and survival depends on mastering both the visible and invisible. Things take on a more intimate, insidious character. Conversations are no longer casual, they are precise instruments of power. Courtiers speak in measured tones, their words loaded with hidden meaning, each syllable a potential tool or trap. You notice a group near the gallery doors, whispering urgently while their fans hide the subtle signs of unease, the slight tension of shoulders, the faint tremor in hands, the unintentional scent of fear beneath layers of perfume. Even the smallest lapse can be catastrophic. Nearby, a young page drops a tray of crystal glasses, the sharp clatter echoing through the hall. There is a moment of tension, but no one reacts outwardly. Assistance is a weakness, and exposure can be fatal. You watch as courtiers calculate their response, adjusting posture and expression as if choreographed. You realize that the entire palace functions as an intricate game of observation, manipulation, and endurance, where every interaction carries consequences. The smells, once overwhelming, are now an essential part of this intricate social calculus. Perfumes mask, reveal, and mislead, sweat, exhaustion, and nervousness betray intentions and vulnerabilities, the faint traces of human decay communicate hidden truths only the trained mind can decode. You move carefully through the hall, noting alliances, rivalries, and subtle shifts in the balance of power. Each moment demands constant vigilance, each breath carries information, each step is both a risk and an opportunity. Even in moments of apparent leisure, the palace exerts its control. Courtiers adjust their gestures, conceal expressions, and perform rituals designed to impress, intimidate, or deceive. You feel the pressure of participation, the unspoken expectation that you must play your part without faltering. By the time the king retires for the night, you are physically and mentally exhausted. Your senses have been battered, your body strained, and your mind stretched to its limits. And yet, you have survived. You have glimpsed the hidden rhythms of Versailles, the deadly dance of scent, etiquette, and observation that governs every corner of the palace. You understand now that a single day here is not merely a test of endurance, it is an initiation, a trial by fire and odor, a lesson in human ingenuity and cruelty. To survive, one must master not only appearance and etiquette but also perception, instinct, and the invisible language of smell that reigns supreme. As you retreat to a small chamber, alone for a moment, you feel a mixture of relief and apprehension. You have navigated the palace for hours, endured its horrors, and yet you know tomorrow will demand even more. The Sun King's court is relentless, an organism that will test you, shape you, and reveal whether you belong. You lie awake, exhausted, haunted by scents and whispers, aware that survival here is never guaranteed and that the palace itself has already left its mark on you. Yet the palace does not sleep. Candles flicker along the endless corridors, casting shadows that dance across gilded moldings, mirrors, and tapestries, and the faint glow of moonlight filters through tall windows, illuminating the opulence while failing to hide the pervasive, omnipresent stench. The night air brings little relief. Instead, it carries the thick, oppressive mixture of perfume, sweat, and human decay into every corner. You move carefully through the dimly lit hallways, aware that even in the dark, the rules of survival remain unyielding. The courtiers have changed their game. By night, whispers carry more weight, gestures become sharper, and alliances can shift without a sound. You notice a small group near a side gallery, their heads bent together, speaking softly while their eyes dart constantly, measuring and calculating. Even the faintest tremor, the tiniest twitch, or the subtlest hint of nervous scent can reveal secrets. You realize that the night transforms the palace into a place of invisible threats, where danger hides in shadows, behind fans, and within the subtle clues that escape untrained eyes. The faint odor of unwashed bodies mingles with expensive perfume, forming an invisible map of the palace hierarchy. Some nobles walk deliberately, using their scent as armor, others are forced into careful navigation, masking fear with layers of powder, wig, and stoic posture. You catch sight of a servant carefully refilling a bottle of perfume, moving silently to ensure the king's favored courtiers maintain their protective barriers. Every motion in this palace is intentional, a piece of a larger game that you have only begun to understand. You feel your own body reacting to the dense atmosphere, your skin clammy, your head pounding, yet you must continue. The corridors wind endlessly, and every door you pass holds a potential trial. Chamber pots are tucked behind curtains, alcoves hide the careless indulgences of the night, and even the faint sound of footsteps can signal a test of your composure. You witness a noblewoman pause briefly, adjusting her wig while sniffing the air ever so slightly, detecting which courtiers have not properly maintained their disguises. The subtle interplay of scent, posture, and glance is hypnotic yet terrifying. You begin to see Versailles as an organism, alive and breathing, where each human body contributes to a vast network of observation, influence, and threat. Here, survival is not just about navigating etiquette, it is about anticipating danger in every interaction, mastering perception, and enduring an environment designed to test your limits. Hours pass, yet the palace's vigilance never slackens. You walk from gallery to hall, observing the intricate dance of survival in motion, subtle shifts in position, whispered words, masked expressions, and the silent communication of odor. Each element is both weapon and shield. The longer you remain, the more you learn that the Sun King's court is not merely a spectacle of beauty, but a battlefield where invisibility and adaptation are as crucial as courage. Exhaustion threatens to overtake you, but there is no respite. The palace, like a sentient entity, seems to hum with the energy of hundreds of bodies in constant negotiation. You notice a cluster of courtiers in a shadowed corner, their conversation inaudible to all but the most attentive, yet the weight of their presence and the subtle shifts in scent betray the seriousness of their discussion. Perfume, sweat, and human odor are instruments in this silent symphony of influence. Reading them accurately is essential for survival. You see a young page stumble near a grand staircase, and instinctively, your body reacts to avoid drawing attention to yourself, aware that even minor errors can have disproportionate consequences. The hallways twist and intersect like a labyrinth, each turn a test of vigilance, each shadow a potential trap. You begin to notice patterns, how certain courtiers position themselves near doorways to intercept others, how servants adjust scents, powders, and hairstyles to maintain appearances, and how subtle gestures communicate warnings or invitations without uttering a word. The air grows thick and oppressive, a mixture of human exertion and the artificial perfumes meant to conceal nature. You inhale carefully, aware that every breath carries information and potential danger. In this environment, the human body is both weapon and liability, a medium through which power, influence, and survival are constantly negotiated. You realize that every sense is tested: sight must detect subtleties of movement, hearing must parse whispered signals, smell must interpret signals hidden beneath layers of fragrance. Your own endurance is pushed to its limits. The palace's vast spaces magnify every error and every success, and the invisible eyes of courtiers and servants alike track your behavior. By early morning, as fatigue presses your body and mind into submission, you understand a fundamental truth: surviving even a single day at Versailles is a trial by fire, a test of instinct, perception, and discipline. The Sun King's court is relentless, a theater where the invisible weapons of smell, observation, and subtle influence dominate over swords, daggers, or overt violence. You have learned that appearances mask reality, that perfume can be both shield and signal, and that endurance in this world depends on mastering not only your outward presentation but your internal awareness. The palace's beauty and terror are inseparable, the opulent decor hides decay, and the grandeur of ceremony conceals a web of threats, observation, and unspoken tests. As you finally rest for a few fleeting hours, you know the coming day will demand even more vigilance. Yet Versailles is far from forgiving. The palace awakens not with gentle light, but with a hum of subtle tension, the constant shuffle of silk and rustle of powdered wigs announcing the unspoken war that has begun anew. Every glance, every movement is monitored, every breath carries consequences. You notice groups of courtiers in hallways, their conversation almost inaudible, but the weight of intent in their gestures unmistakable. Here, secrets are currency, whispers are ammunition, and scent is an invisible weapon more potent than steel. You begin to realize the sheer complexity of survival in this environment. To navigate Versailles, one must observe constantly, anticipate, and act with precision, all while maintaining an exterior of flawless composure. Even servants participate in this dance, though their role is more silent and subtle. They carry messages, refill perfume bottles, remove traces of human frailty, and adjust the appearance of their masters. A misstep on their part can create chaos, just as a misstep from a noble can destroy an entire household's reputation. The scent of the body is never neutral, it conveys rank, stress, weakness, and intent. Some courtiers have mastered its control, layering perfumes and powders with skill that seems almost magical, while others are betrayed by the faintest whiff of human reality beneath their artificial armor. You observe a young nobleman subtly sniffing a passing chambermaid, judging her scent to assess if she has recently bathed, a sign of pride, obedience, or rebellion. Each person here is constantly reading and being read, engaging in a relentless dialogue of observation that never pauses. You feel your body tiring under the strain of constant awareness, every step must be careful, every gesture controlled, every inhalation calculated. Even as you move, you can sense invisible currents of influence guiding courtiers toward allies, away from enemies, and into the favor of those who wield true power. By mid-morning, you are no longer merely surviving, you are learning to interpret the subtle language of Versailles. Perfume, odor, posture, glance, and whisper are all parts of an intricate code. Miss a signal, and you risk being excluded from an alliance or implicated in a minor scandal. You understand that every element of the court's ritual, from the grandest ceremonies to the smallest whisper behind a fan, has been honed over years into a precise system of control, ensuring that only the observant and the adaptable thrive. You witness a minor skirmish of influence near the Grand Gallery, a whispered accusation, a carefully calculated nod, a shift of position designed to manipulate attention. It is a ballet of subtlety, as lethal as any sword fight, and far more dangerous to the uninitiated. You realize that the palace itself is a living entity, each body and each action part of a vast, interwoven network of observation and survival. By late morning, your senses ache under the strain, your mind racing to keep pace with the constant analysis. The invisible tension only intensifies. The Sun King's presence, though often distant, is a constant gravitational force, shaping every interaction and subtle movement. Courtiers orient themselves around him, predicting his mood, attempting to align their own gestures and appearances to match the rhythm of his favor. You notice a young woman adjusting her fan as she approaches the king, hiding not only her expression but also the faintest hint of human odor that might betray anxiety or imperfection. Perfume here functions as both armor and disguise, and those who fail to master it risk social death. Servants scuttle between the courtiers, replenishing scent, adjusting wigs, and removing small traces of human frailty, acting as unseen agents in this relentless theater. You observe a nobleman deliberately leaning away from a peer, careful to avoid contact that might reveal a faint odor of exertion, nervousness, or unwashed skin. Every motion, every inhale, every subtle gesture is data to be interpreted, and missing even the smallest cue could have consequences that ripple across the intricate hierarchy of the court. By afternoon, fatigue threatens to overtake you, yet the necessity of constant vigilance remains absolute. You walk through the hall of mirrors, dazzled by light yet aware of the undercurrent of menace beneath its glittering surface. The reflections in the glass seem almost alive, doubling the courtiers' movements, their gestures, and the invisible language of scent, multiplying the complexity of what you must interpret to survive. Whispered warnings pass between allies, almost inaudible but detectable to the attentive. A misstep in etiquette, a faint sigh, a tremor in a hand, or a subtle misalignment of fan or wig can transform into an advantage for an enemy or a loss of favor with the king. You realize that the court operates on multiple levels simultaneously: the visible spectacle, the invisible social maneuvers, and the olfactory signals that communicate what words cannot. Your body strains under the constant calculation required, your mind alert to subtle changes, your senses assaulted by layers of perfume, sweat, and human presence. Even in moments that appear ceremonial or leisurely, danger lurks. You notice a chamber pot being carried through a side corridor, its contents hidden but faintly detectable in the air, and you are reminded that even the smallest trace of neglect or carelessness can become social currency. You learn quickly that endurance at Versailles is a combination of observation, restraint, and subtle manipulation, as well as a mastery of the senses that few can truly achieve. By evening, you have begun to anticipate patterns: which courtiers are allies, which are rivals, who uses scent as armor, who struggles to conceal weakness, and who manipulates both visual and olfactory signals to gain advantage. You are still new, still vulnerable, but you have survived the day's relentless trials, and in that survival lies a small, yet crucial, measure of confidence. You understand that Versailles is not merely a place of luxury and beauty, it is a battlefield, a crucible where the invisible weapons of scent, posture, and perception dominate, and where a single lapse can be the difference between influence and ruin. As night approaches, you find a small corner to rest briefly, aware that tomorrow will demand even more mastery of this deadly art. Your senses remain keen, your mind alert, and your body tense, knowing that survival is not guaranteed, and that the palace, with all its splendor and filth, will test you again and again. The first full day of immersion into Versailles begins with the same oppressive intensity as the previous day, yet you now carry the faint sense of learned awareness, a fragile shield against the palace's relentless tests. Corridors gleam under polished floors, mirrors multiply the presence of courtiers, and the faint odor of perfume battles subtly against the unavoidable scent of human exertion and neglect. Every step you take is calculated, every glance measured, and every inhalation parsed for both literal and figurative meaning. You notice a cluster of older courtiers in a shadowed gallery, their eyes assessing newcomers like hawks, their whispered commentary so soft it could be missed entirely by anyone not alert. They are judging, analyzing, cataloging, and you suddenly understand that the smallest misstep can condemn a newcomer to invisibility, ridicule, or worse, social ruin. You begin to realize that the palace functions like an intricate machine, each individual a gear that must maintain alignment, and any deviation produces friction, audible or invisible, that can be weaponized. Perfume, once a comforting layer of disguise, now feels like armor that must be constantly repaired, reapplied, adjusted, lest a fleeting whiff betray inexperience or nervousness. Even servants participate in this delicate equilibrium, replenishing powders and fragrances, removing evidence of bodily functions, or subtly signaling warnings through movements and glances. You walk past a young page nearly tipping a tray of glasses, and the eyes of courtiers immediately adjust, assessing the risk and making minor shifts in position to maintain social balance. The entire court operates simultaneously on visible, invisible, and olfactory levels, each layer reinforcing the other in an intricate choreography of survival and influence. You notice a noblewoman adjusting her fan with the smallest tilt, hiding not only expression but the faintest trace of nervousness, anxiety, or even subtle human odor that could reveal weakness. You begin to see the terrifying elegance of Versailles as a living organism, capable of detecting the faintest signs of vulnerability, rewarding the adept, punishing the inattentive, and reshaping the hierarchy with every subtle gesture. By late morning, your body aches from the constant alertness required, your senses fatigued yet hyper-aware, your mind struggling to decode the invisible currents of influence, yet still, you endure. You notice a subtle interaction, a whispered accusation, a shift in stance, the minute movement of a hand concealing a small perfumed flask, each act part of a silent battle for control. It becomes clear that power is not seized with weapons or wealth alone, but with the mastery of perception, patience, and subtlety. Even the grandest ceremonies, meant to display Louis XIV's dominance, function as theaters for observation and manipulation. You realize that to survive, one must integrate oneself into the palace's rhythm, anticipate danger before it emerges, and endure both physical and sensory assault with precision. By mid-afternoon, you are no longer merely observing, you are beginning to participate, navigating the web of scent, gesture, and whispered signal with a tentative but growing competence, aware that mistakes are costly and vigilance is endless. Late afternoon, Versailles shows its true complexity. Courtiers now move with a practiced fluidity, blending ceremony with survival instinct, their powdered faces betraying no emotion, yet their eyes and subtle movements communicating constantly. Perfume and scent remain central, the faint traces of sweat, decay, or nervousness hidden beneath layers of fragrance are signals only the trained detect. You watch a young nobleman lean toward a servant, whispering a subtle instruction while simultaneously sniffing the air to detect any misstep in appearance or scent, reminder that every member of the court, from king to servant, participates in this delicate game. You navigate corridors lined with mirrors, their reflections doubling the presence of courtiers, the patterns of movement, and the invisible language of influence. A misstep, a lapse in posture, or a sudden gasp at a pungent odor could be noted, remembered, and used as leverage. You realize that endurance at Versailles is not merely physical but psychological. To survive, one must read constantly, anticipate dangers unseen, and move with the precision of a predator aware of invisible traps. Even the faintest odor of human weakness, an unwashed coat, a poorly applied layer of perfume, or a hint of nervous sweat, is instantly noticed and interpreted, often shaping the subtle hierarchies of influence that govern every corner of the palace. By evening, the air thickens with the collective human presence, the interplay of perfumes masking and revealing simultaneously. Courtiers adjust their gestures, recalibrate their masks, and maneuver through invisible currents of power with astonishing skill. The king, though distant in this moment, exerts a gravitational pull that shapes behavior, movement, and scent alike. You notice small but crucial interactions, a fan subtly blocked, a glance held too long, the delicate repositioning of a wig, all indicators of influence, observation, and potential opportunity. As night descends, corridors dim under candlelight, shadows stretching across walls and floors. Yet even in darkness, the palace hums with unseen activity, whispers, and the subtle signals of scent and posture. You understand that survival is never complete, that each day demands vigilance and skill, and that the palace itself is a living test of endurance, perception, and subtlety. Exhaustion presses on your body, but your mind remains alert, parsing every detail, noting each interaction, and remembering every nuance. You see how the court's rituals, conversations, and movements create a labyrinth of observation, deception, and silent communication, where the faintest error can jeopardize status, reputation, or even life. By the time you find a brief corner to rest, you recognize a hard truth: Versailles is not merely a palace, it is a crucible, an environment where the body, mind, and senses are tested to their limits, and where mastery over perception, smell, and subtlety determines survival. You drift into a restless sleep, haunted by odors, gestures, and whispers, acutely aware that tomorrow will demand even greater vigilance, skill, and endurance. Versailles greets you with the same dazzling grandeur and subtle menace that have defined your first week at court. The sunlight reflects off polished marble floors and gilded moldings, illuminating the carefully arranged chaos of courtiers, servants, and ceremonial artifacts. Every corner, every mirror, every shadow hides observation, judgment, and potential threat. You walk through the hallways with a heightened awareness, each breath carefully measured to avoid betraying the faintest human odor. Perfume is applied meticulously, powder is reapplied as if it were armor, and even the slightest misstep in posture or gesture could attract unwanted attention. Courtiers pass by in waves, exchanging glances, subtle nods, and whispered information, creating an invisible network of power and influence that constantly shifts with the ebb and flow of the king's attention. You notice a group near a side gallery, huddled so tightly that one miscalculated movement could topple the balance of influence. Their whispers carry meaning, the faint smell of unwashed silk, sweat, or faint traces of fear communicate secrets without a word spoken. Even the servants, often overlooked, operate as key players, adjusting wigs, refreshing perfumes, clearing away traces of human frailty, and subtly signaling warnings or opportunities. By mid-morning, you begin to understand that Versailles functions as a living organism. Every person is a cell in the vast, interwoven body of the court, each contributing to an intricate system of observation, manipulation, and survival. A young noblewoman passes, her fan raised with precise angle and motion, concealing not just expression but subtle signs of vulnerability, anxiety, or hidden intentions. You realize that mastery here is not merely social, it is physiological, psychological, and olfactory. Every scent, glance, and posture is data to be interpreted, and misreading even a single cue could result in social or political disaster. You notice a servant refilling a small vial of perfume, glancing toward a particularly anxious courtier whose body odor is betraying more than words could. This small, nearly invisible act has the power to shift influence, subtly protecting some and exposing others. By afternoon, fatigue gnaws at your body, but the palace demands constant vigilance. Hallways twist, mirrors multiply the presence of courtiers, and every gesture becomes layered with meaning. A whisper, a movement of a hand, a subtle shift in weight, all are part of a silent, continuous negotiation of power. You are no longer merely a spectator, you have become a participant in this delicate, deadly ballet. Each inhalation reminds you of the ever-present reality. Scent is the most potent weapon, a silent signal of weakness, strength, and intent. By evening, the air thickens with the mixture of human bodies, oils, perfumes, and the unavoidable odors of life lived without modern conveniences. You move with care, noting alliances, hierarchies, and hidden threats, aware that every interaction could have consequences that echo far beyond this corridor or chamber. And as the Sun King's presence dominates even from a distance, you understand fully that survival at Versailles requires mastery over every sense, every gesture, and every layer of perception, for even the faintest lapse in vigilance can be fatal to status, reputation, and influence. This transforms into a labyrinth of shadows, whispers, and invisible contests of power. Courtiers slip between candlelit corridors, fans held strategically, gestures carefully measured, and the faint traces of perfume and sweat intermingling to create a living map of the social terrain. You see a nobleman adjusting his powdered wig while subtly sniffing the air, detecting the imperceptible signs of anxiety, exertion, or fear in those around him. Each subtle shift in posture, glance, or scent carries potential consequences. Even the servants continue their silent orchestration, removing traces of bodily function, replenishing perfume, discreetly warning or facilitating interactions, ensuring that the balance of influence remains intact. You walk through the hall of mirrors, noting the way reflections multiply movements, glances, and whispers, creating an almost overwhelming network of visual and olfactory signals. A misstep here could be catastrophic, a faint sign of hesitation, a misplaced gesture, or an unnoticed odor could mark you as inexperienced or weak. You realize that survival in Versailles requires mastery of an invisible language, scent, posture, and gesture interwoven with speech and observation to create an unbroken chain of perception and influence. You observe two courtiers exchanging a brief nod, their movement subtle, yet full of unspoken meaning, a promise, a warning, a threat, all encoded in gesture, glance, and scent. The young page who drops a tray of glasses is instantly assessed by all nearby, a lapse noted, interpreted, catalogued, yet ignored outwardly for appearances. By midnight, exhaustion has become your constant companion, yet vigilance cannot lapse. You find a small corner to rest briefly, aware that even in darkness, the palace hums with observation, maneuvering, and subtle threats. The faint odors of unwashed skin, perfume, and bodily functions mingle in an invisible symphony that tells endless stories to those capable of reading them. You understand now that Versailles is not merely a palace of luxury, it is a crucible of human endurance, perception, and subtle manipulation, where even the strongest must adapt and the unobservant perish socially. Sleep, when it comes, is restless, haunted by the memory of scents, whispers, gestures, and the constant calculation required to survive. And yet, even in this fatigue, a tiny seed of comprehension grows. The palace is a school of survival, and mastery over scent, observation, and subtlety is the only path to endurance. You know that the days ahead will demand more, that every breath, glance, and step is part of a continuous trial, and that to survive in the orbit of familiar brilliance and subtle menace of Versailles, yet you now carry an understanding of its rhythms, fragile though it may be. Courtiers emerge from their chambers, wigs perfectly powdered, dresses and coats starched into perfection, every movement designed to assert status while concealing human frailty. The palace smells like a complex orchestra of perfumes, sweat, oils, and the faintest traces of decay, a language in which every courtier's presence communicates intent, weakness, or strength. You walk through the galleries, mirrors reflecting endless images of nobility, multiplying gestures and glances into a dizzying web of observation. Each corridor you traverse is a battlefield, each interaction, a duel of subtlety, where whispered words, concealed expressions, and carefully masked odors carry more weight than any sword. You notice a young noblewoman brushing her hand subtly across her powdered cheek, masking the telltale signs of anxiety while sending invisible signals to those attuned to the court's codes. Even servants act as silent participants in this elaborate drama, refilling perfumes, adjusting wigs, clearing traces of bodily function, and conveying information in ways imperceptible to the untrained eye. You realize that survival here requires vigilance beyond ordinary endurance, for every breath you take, every gesture you make, and every scent you emit can have consequences that echo throughout the palace hierarchy. By mid-morning, your senses are both overwhelmed and finely tuned. You note which courtiers move with confident ease, which display subtle signs of fear, and which manipulate appearance and scent to project false strength. Even the faintest odor, the most minute shift in posture, or the slightest twitch in expression can indicate vulnerability or opportunity. The palace functions as a living organism, each individual a node in a vast network of observation and influence, and your survival depends on reading, interpreting, and participating in this silent communication. As the day stretches into afternoon, you navigate the labyrinthine corridors with growing skill, yet every movement requires mental calculation and physical restraint. Perfume becomes both shield and weapon, disguising human weaknesses while signaling status and alliance. You observe a brief interaction between two older courtiers, their heads tilted close in what seems an innocuous conversation, but subtle changes in the angle of their fans, the faintness of scent in their proximity, and the micro-expressions they share reveal a subtle power play. The palace's complexity becomes almost overwhelming, mirrors reflect endless iterations of human gestures, corridors multiply the number of possible observers, and scent travels invisibly, layering subtle cues into a constantly shifting battlefield. By late afternoon, fatigue presses on your body, yet your mind remains alert, parsing every subtle signal, every change in fragrance, every whispered tone. The palace, with its beauty and terror, has become a crucible in which your endurance, perception, and adaptability are tested continuously, and you begin to see that only those capable of mastering the invisible arts of scent, observation, and gesture can endure. The palace transforms once again, this time into a theater of shadows, whispers, and invisible contests of dominance. Courtiers slip between candlelit hallways, fans raised to conceal expressions while subtle movements communicate intentions with precision. The mixture of perfume, sweat, and the faint traces of human decay creates an invisible map of the court, one that those attuned to its codes can navigate while the untrained stumble blindly. You observe a nobleman leaning just enough toward a servant to whisper instructions while also subtly testing the air for evidence of nervousness, fear, or weakness in those around him. The faintest odor, the most minor gesture, or the slightest glance can have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Even the smallest mishap, a tray dropped, a fan mishandled, or a breath exposed, becomes fodder for judgment, gossip, or manipulation. By nightfall, the corridors are alive with invisible currents of influence, each whisper and movement contributing to an intricate network of power that extends throughout the palace. The servants continue their essential, invisible work, adjusting perfume, clearing evidence of human frailty, signaling warnings or opportunities, and ensuring that the delicate balance of observation and social hierarchy remains intact. You walk through the Hall of Mirrors, where light reflects endlessly, multiplying both the beauty and the threat of Versailles. Reflections echo gestures, glances, and subtle shifts in posture, creating an almost overwhelming cascade of signals that must be interpreted accurately to survive. The faint odors of sweat, perfume, and bodily function mingle in complex patterns, revealing secrets, intentions, and vulnerabilities invisible to the casual observer. You begin to understand that endurance in this palace requires mastery of the invisible arts, scent, gesture, posture, and observation, all synchronized to maintain safety and opportunity. Even as exhaustion gnaws at your body, your mind is alert to every nuance, a tilt of the fan, a subtle movement of the wrist, a change in the spacing between courtiers, or the faintest shift in fragrance can signify both danger and opportunity. By midnight, the palace is both a breathtaking spectacle and a relentless teacher, instructing in endurance, perception, and subtle manipulation. You rest briefly in a corner, senses still attuned to the faintest signals, aware that survival is never complete and that tomorrow will demand even greater vigilance, skill, and adaptation. The palace, magnificent and terrifying, has taught you that life at court is not about wealth or power alone. It is about mastering the invisible language of human presence, scent, and influence, where even the strongest must remain constantly alert to endure. As you drift into a restless sleep, the palace hums with life around you, whispers and odors leaving indelible marks on your senses, mind, and body, a constant reminder that survival here is an ongoing, exhausting, and invisible battle. Awakens once more, a palace of radiant grandeur and relentless scrutiny. You move carefully through hallways lined with gilded mirrors and polished marble, each reflection multiplying the presence of courtiers, servants, and the subtle movements that govern survival. The air is thick with perfume, sweat, and faint traces of human decay, an invisible language that communicates status, anxiety, and intent. Each step you take, each glance you cast, and each breath you draw must be measured to avoid revealing inexperience or weakness. Courtiers pass by in coordinated waves, whispering, gesturing, and sniffing the air to detect missteps in appearance, scent, or posture. Even the servants play essential, hidden roles, replenishing powders, adjusting wigs, clearing traces of human function, and conveying warnings or subtle opportunities through imperceptible movements. You observe a group of older courtiers subtly nodding to each other, their micro-expressions and faint odors conveying alliances, distrust, and hidden agendas. The palace functions as a living, breathing organism where every individual contributes to a complex web of observation and influence, and survival depends on reading, interpreting, and participating in this silent, omnipresent game. By mid-morning, your senses are strained but attuned. You note which courtiers command attention, which attempt to mask nervousness, and which exploit subtle gestures and scent to project dominance. Even minor deviations, a misaligned wig, a faint whiff of unmasked perspiration, a hand held incorrectly, can be detected, catalogued, and leveraged. You witness a subtle confrontation between two nobles, a whispered accusation masked as gossip, the careful shifting of weight, and a measured tilt of the fan. Each signal carries meaning far beyond what is said aloud. By afternoon, fatigue weighs on your body, yet your mind must remain sharp to navigate the corridors, interpret the invisible cues, and avoid exposure. Perfume becomes both protection and communication, concealing human frailty while signaling status and intent. The Hall of Mirrors reflects endless repetitions of these interactions, amplifying both beauty and threat. As you move through the palace, the mixture of odors, whispers, and gestures forms a complex tapestry of social and olfactory information, a constant reminder that survival is not merely physical but psychological and sensory. You realize that the palace is a battlefield where every interaction is a test, every breath carries potential consequence, and mastery over observation, subtlety, and endurance is the only path to safety. By evening, your understanding the palace transforms into a theater of shadows, movement, and invisible threats. Courtiers slip between candlelit hallways, fans positioned precisely, gestures measured, and faint layers of perfume masking the human realities beneath. The faint traces of sweat, bodily function, and fear create a map of influence that the trained mind can navigate, while the uninitiated stumble blindly. You notice a nobleman leaning slightly toward a servant, whispering instructions while subtly assessing the room for unguarded weaknesses, tremors, faint scents, microexpressions. Even the smallest human error, a tray dropped, a breath too heavy, a poorly concealed scent, can have consequences that echo through the social hierarchy. The servants continue their vital, invisible work, replenishing powders and perfume, clearing evidence of human frailty, and facilitating or obstructing social maneuvers as needed. Walking through the Hall of Mirrors, you perceive the endless reflections not only of the courtiers' appearances but also the subtle signals that define influence, threat, and opportunity. Every gesture, glance, and odor contributes to a complex, invisible battlefield where survival is measured in subtlety and endurance rather than strength or weaponry. The air is heavy with the collective human presence, and the intermingling of perfume, sweat, and faint traces of decay communicates volumes to those trained to read it. You begin to anticipate patterns: who manipulates others, who conceals weakness, who exploits gaps in observation, and who is vulnerable. The palace tests not only your body but your mind and senses. It demands that you interpret invisible cues, manage perception, and maintain composure under constant scrutiny. Even in brief moments of rest, your awareness cannot slacken, as every shadow, whisper, and scent carries meaning. By midnight, exhaustion presses on you physically, yet your mind remains engaged, parsing gestures, odors, and unspoken interactions to survive another day. Versailles is no longer merely a palace, it is a crucible, a living organism that rewards vigilance, subtlety, and endurance while punishing inattention and naivety. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and haunted by the invisible theater that dominates every aspect of life here. You understand fully now: to live even a single day at court requires mastery over observation, scent, gesture, and subtle influence, and the palace itself will never allow ignorance or weakness to go unnoticed. The Sun King's presence, though distant, permeates every hallway and mirror, every whisper and movement, and even the faintest lapse in vigilance is recorded and remembered in the invisible ledger of Versailles. By the time you finally rest, learn to navigate Versailles not merely with cautious steps, but with an understanding of its invisible rules. The palace, magnificent and oppressive, no longer overwhelms you entirely. Its corridors, mirrors, and glittering halls have become a map you can read with practiced eyes. Every gesture, glance, and subtle scent is part of the ongoing negotiation of power, and you now recognize patterns that would have been invisible on your first day. Courtiers move with precision, whispering in measured tones, fans angled to conceal both expression and faint signs of human weakness. Perfume acts as armor, scent as information, and the faintest whiff of anxiety, exertion, or decay can shift influence in milliseconds. Even servants are participants in this delicate balance. Their discreet actions, adjusting powder, replenishing perfume, removing traces of bodily function, shape the invisible currents of favor and opportunity. You pass through a gallery where a young noblewoman tilts her fan just so, concealing a subtle shiver, while her nearby companion adjusts his wig, inhaling imperceptibly to gauge her composure. The palace operates on multiple planes simultaneously: the visible, ceremonial displays of wealth and power; the invisible, whispered negotiations and alliances; and the olfactory, where every scent conveys hidden truths. By mid-morning, you have internalized a rhythm of observation, anticipation, and subtle action. Each corridor is a chessboard, each glance a move, and each breath a communication. A faint odor, a slight tremor, or an unnoticed gesture can be both opportunity and hazard. You realize that survival in this palace does not require brute strength or eloquence alone, it demands mastery over perception, endurance, and the invisible codes of social, visual, and olfactory interaction. By afternoon, fatigue is constant, yet your mind is sharper, decoding layers of information the untrained would miss entirely. You notice subtle contests of influence around you, a whispered comment, a carefully concealed smirk, a deliberate misplacement of a hand or a fan. Even these minute acts carry weight, their impact magnified in a palace where appearances dominate and perception dictates fate. You understand that mastery of Versailles is not just endurance, it is anticipation, adaptation, and invisibility, a constant balancing act where the unobservant fall and the perceptive thrive. By evening, the palace hums with its usual combination of beauty, danger, and invisible warfare. The faintest odors mingle in complex layers, whispers move like currents beneath conversation, and every gesture, however slight, is read and interpreted by someone somewhere. You move through these currents with skill, avoiding pitfalls, reading opportunities, and managing your own presence as carefully as any weapon. Survival is no longer tentative, it is learned, hard-won, and constantly reaffirmed through observation, restraint, and precise action. You have become, in a small measure, attuned to the palace's relentless rhythm, capable of reading the invisible threads of influence, odor, and subtle threat that define life at the Sun King's court. The palace transforms into its most intimate, insidious form. Candlelight flickers along gilded walls, shadows twisting and stretching across mirrors, floors, and tapestries. The air is saturated with perfume, human scent, and faint traces of decay, a language that carries messages, intentions, and warnings invisible to the casual observer. Courtiers slip through the corridors with measured grace, fans concealing expressions, subtle gestures communicating allegiance, strategy, or suspicion. Even the faintest lapse in composure, a tremor in a hand, a whiff of nervous sweat, a misaligned wig, can be observed, interpreted, and leveraged in the subtle warfare of influence. Servants continue their silent work, replenishing perfumes, adjusting wigs, removing evidence of human vulnerability, and signaling imperceptibly to those they serve. You move carefully through the hall of mirrors, reflections multiplying gestures, glances, and scents, creating a complex network of visible and invisible signals. Each subtle shift of posture, tilt of a fan, or inhalation communicates information, and you now possess the skill to interpret these signals with growing accuracy. By midnight, you are exhausted yet alert, acutely aware of every shadow, whisper, and odor. The palace, in all its beauty and terror, has transformed you into a participant in a living organism of observation, manipulation, and endurance. You understand that survival at Versailles is not simply a matter of etiquette or appearance, it is a mastery of perception, anticipation, and subtle action, where every breath, glance, and gesture carries weight. The Sun King's influence permeates every corner of the palace, his presence felt even in absence, dictating the rhythms of movement, the allocation of favor, and the invisible hierarchies of power. You reflect on your journey from naive newcomer to a cautious, perceptive participant, capable of navigating the treacherous currents of scent, gesture, and social intrigue. The palace has tested your body, mind, and senses to their limits, and you have endured, learning the invisible language that determines survival. As you finally rest, your senses attuned to the faintest signals, you realize a profound truth: life at Versailles is a continuous trial, a ballet of subtlety and perception, and only those who master the invisible codes of scent, gesture, and observation can endure even a single day, let alone a lifetime, under the gaze of the Sun King. The grandeur, the danger, the elegance, and the stench are inseparable, forming a crucible in which human endurance, cunning, and adaptability are tested relentlessly. You lie awake, senses heightened, aware that mastery here is never complete, that vigilance is eternal, and that survival is an art learned only through observation, patience, and subtlety, a lesson that no luxury, gold, or beauty can replace.